November 4th, 2010. An Airbus A380, a titan of the skies, suddenly suffered a catastrophic failure. 440 passengers. Due to a single millimeter error in the engine's manufacturing process, their lives hung in the balance. After the plane made two loud bangs, the captain instantly realized they were in a serious situation. He immediately engaged the autopilot to level off the climbing aircraft. The 5 pilots then turned their full attention to the instrument panel and the aircraft's electronic centralized aircraft monitor, ECAM. Within 20 seconds, the ECAM displayed over 80 warnings of varying severity. The highest priority warnings were at the top. They all pointed to engine number 2. Upon identifying the issue with engine number 2, the captain immediately throttled it back. Sure enough, on the display, an engine 2 fire alert appeared, along with a failure warning. Following procedure, the crew activated the fire extinguisher for engine 2. But the extinguisher failed to discharge, so they activated the second fire bottle. Still, there was no indication on the instruments. This was just one of many problems caused by severed electrical cables. The engine's fire suppression system had malfunctioned. After addressing the engine 2 issue, the crew discovered numerous other warnings unrelated to the engines. The captain immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. The first officer made a radio call, not a mayday, but the lower urgency pan-pan. Next, they had to address the 80+ remaining ECAM messages. They used the status page on the display to get a full picture of which systems on the aircraft were malfunctioning. The crew now faced a critical decision. With so many system failures, should they try to land immediately, or should they first work through the checklists? This is where experience became crucial. First, the captain tested the aircraft's autopilot function. It turned out to be working perfectly. This meant the aircraft could be left on autopilot in a holding pattern. This would free them up to complete the remaining ECAM actions and troubleshoot the problems. Additionally, it would allow the overweight aircraft to burn off fuel. The last thing the captain wanted was to attempt a landing without knowing the full extent of the damage. How were the flight controls? Could the flaps be extended? Would the brakes still work? All these crucial factors were complete unknowns. Therefore, it was better to resolve all the issues they could while still in the air. This would ensure the entire crew fully understood the aircraft's condition before landing. Debris from the burst turbine disc had severed the control cables for the other 3 engines. Engines 1 and 4 entered a protected, degraded mode. Engine 3 went into alternate mode. However, these 3 engines had suffered no physical damage. The issues were purely with their electronic controls. So after assessing the situation, the crew agreed. It was safe for the plane to continue flying. The first officer requested a holding pattern. The crew would work through the remaining ECAM checklists while airborne. They would return to Singapore Changi Airport only after fully assessing the situation. When the engine exploded, many passengers in the cabin had seen the holes punched in the left wing by debris. The cabin manager used the emergency call system to contact the flight deck, but the flight crew was busy managing the emergency. The emergency call chime was relatively quiet, and the indicator light was in an obscure location, so they didn't notice the call from the cabin. However, this minor incident did not compromise safety. After the captain decided to enter the holding pattern, the crew sent the second officer back to the cabin to inspect the damage. A passenger suddenly stopped him. As it turned out, this passenger was also a Qantas pilot. After the failure occurred, he had used the in-flight entertainment system's live feed from the external cameras and saw that the left wing was leaking fuel. After seeing the footage, the second officer went to the rear of the aircraft's lower deck. He could see that, under the wing near engine 2, a large amount of fuel was leaking. He quickly returned to the flight deck to report his findings to the captain. Upon learning that passengers could see the damage to the aircraft, the captain made an announcement to reassure them. "I do apologize. I'm sure where we have a technical issue with number 2 engine, we have dealt with the situation. The aircraft is secure at this stage. We're going to have to hold for some time whilst we do light now load, by dumping some fuel and a number of checklists we have to perform. And as you can, I'm sure you are aware, we're not preceding the city. At the stage, we're making our left turn now to track back towards Singapore. And as we progress with this, I will keep you informed. At this stage, everything is secure. Aircraft is flying safely, and we'll get back to very shortly with further information. Thank you for your patience." After the announcement, the crew worried that the live camera feed showing the damage would cause passengers to panic. After some discussion, they concluded that suddenly cutting the feed would actually be worse, giving passengers the impression that the plane was doomed. So they decided to keep the cameras on. Far away, at Qantas headquarters in Sydney, dispatchers had seen the monitoring data sent via satellite and knew almost instantly that there was a problem. They used the ACARS system to send multiple messages to Flight 32. When the failure occurred, the aircraft was flying over the island of Batam, Indonesia. Large fragments of the turbine disc and engine cowling fell from the sky, damaging the houses of local residents. Fortunately, everyone was at work when it happened, so no one was injured. Local residents took photos of the debris, which featured the Qantas logo, and posted them online. People who didn't know the full story assumed that a Qantas plane had crashed, and this news quickly reached the ears of investors. The Qantas CEO received a phone call asking why the company's stock price was plummeting. It was the first he'd heard of the incident. After circling for 50 minutes, the crew of Qantas Flight 32 had finally completed all the tasks they could while airborne. The fuel imbalance between the wing tanks was worsening, and the fuel dumping system was also inoperative. This meant the crew couldn't dump fuel to reduce the aircraft's weight. They had no choice but to attempt an overweight landing as soon as possible. Before any landing, pilots must calculate the landing performance. The purpose of this calculation is to determine if the aircraft can stop safely on the available runway. Singapore's Changi Airport has 3 runways. The east and center runways were available, both 4,000 meters long. The crew chose the center runway as it was closer to the fire station. They entered the aircraft's landing weight, along with the 9 failed systems, into the landing performance calculation software. The software reported it was unable to calculate the stopping distance. No result. This was something the crew had not anticipated. So they tried again using their backup laptop computer. The software gave the same incalculable result. The implication was clear. The 4,000 meter runway was not long enough to land the plane safely. In fact, this no-result calculation was caused by a software bug. When calculating for an aircraft at maximum landing weight, the software adds a penalty for every single system failure. With 9 failures stacked together, this penalty value became enormous. The resulting runway length calculation far exceeded 4,000 meters. The calculated number was so large that the software was unable to display it, so it defaulted to showing no result. Then, experienced check captain David Evans thought of another approach. This time, he tried using the aircraft's actual weight for the calculation. Unexpectedly, when using the aircraft's actual weight, the software bypassed the failure penalty logic. It calculated that the plane would need 3,900 meters to come to a complete stop. This left them with a margin of just 100 meters. there were no longer runways available anywhere near Singapore. Facing this crisis, the crew had no choice but to use this runway. After preparing for the approach, Captain de Crespigny canceled the holding pattern. Qantas Flight 32, under the guidance of air traffic control, prepared for its final landing. During the approach, the captain disengaged the autopilot and took manual control to test the aircraft's handling. He discovered that the aircraft's roll control felt more sluggish than usual. Apart from that, the other flight controls seemed to be working normally. With one engine out of action, and to prevent any surprises from the electronically faulty engines 1 and 4 during landing, the captain came up with a plan. He would set the 2 outboard engines to a constant thrust setting to provide the aircraft's basic power requirements. He would then use only the least affected engine, number 3, to control the speed. Meanwhile, the first officer informed ATC that they would require fire services on landing and requested a longer than usual final approach to allow time to deal with any potential issues. Under autopilot control, Qantas Flight 32 lined up with Changi Airport's center runway. A hydraulic system failure meant the crew had to use the alternate gear extension system to lower the landing gear. Very fortunately, the landing gear system itself was undamaged, and the gear extended normally. Because the leading-edge slats were also powered by the failed hydraulic system, the plane could only extend its trailing-edge flaps to increase lift at low speed. Combined with the excess weight, the aircraft's minimum selectable airspeed and its approach speed were only 3 to 5 knots apart. If the speed dropped below the minimum, the plane would stall. If it was higher than the approach speed, the plane would likely overrun the runway. Captain de Crespigny did his utmost, using only engine number 3 to precisely control the aircraft's airspeed. He disengaged the autopilot at 800 feet. As the plane got closer to the ground, the turbulence increased. Controlling the airspeed with just one engine was an incredibly difficult task for any pilot. Although just before landing, a stall warning briefly sounded in the cockpit, Captain de Crespigny still managed to successfully land the crippled Super Jumbo at Singapore's Changi Airport. As the 432-ton behemoth touched down, the captain immediately applied the brakes and engaged the thrust reverser on the one remaining engine, number 3. Although the reverse thrust didn't contribute much to deceleration, it would help reduce wear on the brake pads. As the plane slowed to 60 knots, Captain de Crespigny knew they were safe. He even made a cabin announcement and cracked a joke with the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Singapore with the darkest 11:45 midday on Thursday, the 4th of November, 2010. And I think you'll join me with the notion that this was one of the nicest landings I had an experience for a while. The plane came to a stop 150 meters from the end of the runway. It stopped. Fire trucks immediately rushed onto the runway and sprayed the aircraft with firefighting foam to prevent the red-hot brakes from igniting the leaking fuel. As the crew began emergency procedures, they discovered that engine number 1 on the left side, its cables severed, could not be shut down. After confirming there was no fire risk, the crew decided not to evacuate using the inflatable slides, as they were concerned the slides themselves could cause injuries. With the aircraft's only remaining radio being used to communicate with the firefighters, the crew used their personal cell phones to call Changi Airport's ground services to request air stairs. The 440 passengers, after waiting for 50 minutes in the sweltering cabin, were safely evacuated from the right side of the aircraft. The uncontrollable number 1 engine, after being sprayed with fire hoses for over 2 hours, finally shut down. All 469 people aboard Qantas Flight 32, 2 hours after takeoff, had returned to Singapore completely unharmed. This news once again spread via the internet around the world. And this time, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The 5 pilots, in the aftermath of the engine explosion that caused severe damage to the aircraft, had made a series of judgments and decisions that led to a perfect outcome. At the same time, the safety of this giant technologically advanced aircraft was called into question. After a 3-year investigation, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau released its final report on the incident. By analyzing engine data, the investigation team was able to identify the cause of the uncontained turbine disc failure, a fractured oil pipe. They discovered that an oil pipe for the turbine disc bearing had a significant quality defect from its manufacturing process. The wall thickness of this pipe was 5 millimeters thinner than specified. Because an oil filter had to be installed at the pipe's base, it was necessary to drill a countersink hole larger than the main bore. This countersink hole was supposed to be perfectly aligned with the center of the main bore. However, due to a misalignment of the jig at the subcontractor's factory, a company called Hampson, the machine drilled the hole off-center. During subsequent inspections, because the countersink area had already been welded, it was very difficult to spot the drilling error, and so this defective part ended up being installed on all engines of that type. And the engine that failed on this flight wasn't even the one with the worst tolerance issue. Even if Qantas Flight 32 had not experienced this failure, the problem of oil fires caused by faulty pipes would inevitably have occurred on another aircraft. After the truth came to light, all bearings produced by Hampson were taken out of production and subsequently scrapped. Rolls-Royce revised its design and manufacturing processes to ensure a consensus on production could be reached with its subcontractors during the design phase. An error of less than 0.5 millimeter nearly caused the world's largest passenger airliner to crash, and Captain de Crespigny, who saved the aircraft, was awarded the Order of Australia for his outstanding achievement. The 5 pilots of Qantas Flight 32 in 2011 received the Polaris Award, representing the highest honor in civil aviation. In this incident, the design of the A380 also deserves praise. Even with one of the aircraft's 2 hydraulic systems damaged, the fly-by-wire system still allowed for high-quality control of the aircraft. The autopilot continued to function perfectly. The ECAM and its status pages allowed the crew to quickly understand the aircraft's status and troubleshoot the faults. All of this gave the crew ample time to make decisions after the failure, rather than focusing solely on flying the plane. Since its founding, Qantas has had a tradition. If it can be fixed, it never gets scrapped. This A380, at a cost of $139 million and 2 years of work, was successfully repaired. As of the release of this video, the aircraft, named Nancy Bird Walton, is still flying the London to Sydney route.